So here's our next vehicle we're going to show off from the National Armoured Cavalry Collection here at Fort Benning. This is a famous face, and Hilary is going to tell us all about it.
This is a StuG III G. It was produced, this particular one was produced by Alket in December 1944. So it's very near the end of the war. So we see a lot of what are known as slate features involved in this. But I suppose to look at the StuG, you have to see where it fitted in. It was an artillery vehicle. It wasn't a tank or panzer vehicle. It was an artillery vehicle, and its original purpose was to destroy bunkers and dugouts and so forth. And it was to support the infantry. But in those days, it had a short 75, a little small 75mm gun, and it did a great job at destroying bunkers and supporting the infantry. But when the threat of modern Soviet vehicles came along, they were very quickly able to install a long-barreled 75. So initially there was an L43, this one is an L48. It meant L standing for the length between the front of the gun and the back of the breech. That's how Germans measured their guns. And that gun was a very accurate and very powerful gun for its time. From 1940, late 42 onwards, they had the long barrel gun in them. And then gradually they became more and more involved in protecting ground troops against a tank attack. But in 1943, Heinz Guderian, the famous General Heinz Guderian, was given control of the Panzer Commission, and he decided that since he was responsible for all the Panzertruppen, that they would take control of the StuG production as well as tank production. And then from that point onwards, you got a StuG arriving not with the artillery, but with anti-tank troops. There was one slight difference between the two vehicles. The tank troops had radios that communicated with tank formations, whereas the artillery guys had a different type of radio, a different set of radios that communicated with the artillery troops. The performance of this under the tank troops wasn't as spectacular as with the artillery troops, because the artillery troops had been trained to always avoid any sort of aggressive contact with the enemy. So they tended to hide, line up, defend, whereas the panzer troops who were getting these vehicles for the first time were using them also in offense as well as attack and defense. The vehicle itself, if we look at it, this is one of the latest models. As I said, it has an 80mm armour plate in the front, 80mm in front of the driver's compartment. This one being built by Alket tended to have what they called a tough blender, which is a cast gun mantlet. There's no significance in that compared with the welded mantlet, except that they could be produced in a different steel company. And in late 44, they introduced a coaxial machine gun with this, and that's what the hole on the side. But they spent most of the war, they didn't have that coaxial machine gun. This vehicle also has on the roof, but it's missing from this museum exhibit, it has what the Germans called a Rundenfeuer machine gun, which is a 360-degree traverse machine gun that was operated on a periscopic sight, so they could defend their vehicle with that. They also had on the roof at this period, they had what was called a Nahverteidigungswaffe, which was a close-in defense weapon, where they could fire a grenade-type device in any direction from the top of the vehicle to deter any attack by infantry squads. So maybe we'd walk around the vehicle a little bit and talk about some of the features. Okay, well, we were talking first about the gun. It's an L48, but here in front of the vehicle, the museum have very cleverly cited a gun that was basically an L24 from the original design for the StuG. This one actually has a slightly longer barrel on it, but this is mounted on a improvised mount for using in concrete defences. So it's what's known as a gun for the Festungstruppe, the fortress troops. So nothing that was manufactured was ever allowed to go to waste. So this breech and the recoil cylinders and so forth are all from one of these, or maybe one of the other vehicles that use that type of gun. Okay, going back to the extinguishers, here we have the driver's compartment. He's in a compartment way off down here in front. This here at the side is a pistol port, or a vision port, a little small hole for him to look out. And in emergencies, the driver was meant to get out through one of these hatches here at the front. It's quite an interesting challenge to make the contortions to get in and out of that. But if we look along the side of the vehicle, this is one of the few vehicles in the world that still has intact the Schutzen holders. Now, to talk about Schutzen, it's a whole science in itself, because what happened in 1941-42 was that more and more Russian anti-tank teams were coming on stream with the Russian anti-tank rifle, which actually could penetrate the vertical side armour of a Panzer III. That's only 30mm in there. And this threat hadn't been envisaged, but with large numbers of these anti-tank teams with their anti-tank rifles, they could knock out one of these vehicles. They mightn't knock it out completely, it mightn't go on fire or anything like that, but enough to stop it in an attack. So at first the idea was, we have to design new vehicles with thicker armour on the sides. But then one of the German scientists came up with this concept of hanging 5.5mm plates on either side. They were relatively loosely hung, but when the Russian anti-tank rifle round came through the plate, hit the plate, the energy would be dissipated before it struck the main plate, and that worked perfectly. So that's the Schutzen. But here we have the original racks for the Type 2 Schutzen, which is this cylindrical one, which they could hang the Schutzen plates over, running all the way back, protecting all the sides of the vehicle. So it has certain features that people who are interested in the technicalities would like. Alcat were the only people to do this return roller with the wheels, with the 6 small holes in it. Alcat were the only people to do a forged support for the track guard. It's probably not very clear on the video because the vehicle is covered in dust, but this is an immaculate example of a original colour scheme for extinguishers from 1944. You have mostly green. This is a green patch here. You have a lot of dark brown, and although it's not very clear, there is dunkelgelb, the yellow is here. Now the intriguing thing about this also is that if you clean off the top of these track guards, they're in red primer, they've never been painted. So you could say that this vehicle is a 4-colour scheme, or maybe even a 5-colour scheme, because of certain other things on it. So, but this is the original paint scheme, and there are very few vehicles that actually have that. Yeah, this is a mounting for the spare wheel, not in place at the moment. And here are the original markings for this unit. The wolf's head, but what might be intriguing for people is the Balkenkreuz, which normally has a white outline. The white outline has been overpainted in red, and at the end of the war, in December onwards, they were painting the crosses with the red outline because they had realized that the enemy were targeting the vehicles by seeing the white outlines of the cross. So that's what the colour you need for your late war vehicles if you're making models of it. Right, so starting with where the crew were in this vehicle, you have the Sturmkanon 40 back here, but as I say, it has more or less a field gun mounting for this gun, but it was a very inexpensive solution to this problem. The design came from a very famous engineer called Michaels, who was the chief engineer of the Alcat company. And there's a book coming out now which will talk all about his history. A colleague in Germany is just about to publish that. And this was a standard Panzer III chassis with this armour body placed on top. with the StuG cannons mounted in between on it. There's a big series of girders go from each side of the hull to mount that. Then on top of the vehicle, you can see where the crew were. Here on the right side of the vehicle is the loader's hatch. In front, though missing, is the position for the 360-degree rotating machine gun mount. And in front is the Naberteilungswaffe. Naberteilungswaffe for throwing out grenades and so forth. And these other items sticking up are what's known as pilsen, which were for screwing in the poles for a 2-ton crane so they could do self-maintenance on a vehicle. The commander sat over here in his own area back here, and he has a rotating hatch. So he could rotate. He has 7 periscopes that he can rotate and see around him. This one is a bit jammed on this museum area. The gunner sat in front of him. This is the position of the gun sight here, up through here, projected through here. And as I say, the coaxial machine gun runs forward just alongside the gun. That was only a feature that they put in towards the end to conserve ammunition, because prior to that they were wasting high explosive ammunition attacking infantry, but they could deal with the machine gun there. The 2 radio antennas at the rear, radio sets, depending on the type of vehicle it was, radio sets alongside the commander and the gunner. If it was a command vehicle, they had more powerful radios on the right side, and they had an antenna which was the so-called stern antenna, the star antenna, for the long-range activities. Conventional Panzer III type rear engine deck and rear hull, so nothing very special about this. But as I say, the features of this vehicle, when you examine it carefully, is that it has its original colour scheme on it, even though it's covered in dust. Along here I can see all this track guard red primer. Amazing. Okay.